I asked you to think of an iconic character from the 1950s with blonde hair who is known only by her first name. Who would you think of? Well, I mean, other than Barbie. Eloise. Eloise started with a picture book in 1955 and quickly exploded in popularity. And almost 70 years later, she's still beloved. So today, I'd like to look at the history of the Eloise franchise. Eloise was created by Thompson, who's a very interesting figure in, old Hollywood. She was born in 1909, and her name was Catherine Fink. She was born to a Jewish father and a Christian mother. And when she wanted to work in show business, she changed her name and had her nose straightened. She would have multiple nose jobs over the course of her life. She was not considered attractive when she was alive. I think she's perfectly attractive, but a lot of the stuff that was written about her was about how ugly she was.
And people always joke about, she had a face for radio. Well, in this case, it was true. She wasn't a traditionally beautiful woman. She was kind of masculine.
There was a 1936 Radio Guide article about her that said, "When she looked into the mirror and a homely girl stared back, Thompson went to work with a will and made that homely girl a star." You're like, Jesus. She had kind of a strong jaw and a strong nose. She was considered kind of mannish. She wasn't actually that tall. She was only 5'5", but she reads much taller. And so I guess all of those features combined to make her not attractive. But she was a piano prodigy. She played with the St. Louis Symphony at the age of 16. And she was never focused on school. She was always focused on performing arts. So when she was in college, she was doing all sorts of extracurriculars, theater, chorus, glee club, whatever. And she liked being in leadership roles in those extracurriculars. There is an extremely detailed biography of Thompson written by Sam Irvin. I'm going to be honest, I did not read all of it, or most of it, because this is a video about Eloise, and a lot of the information is not super relevant to what I was trying to write about. But if you want a ton of information about Thompson's life, it's kind of the best resource available. And that had a lot of information about her earlier life. And it also had a lot of information about her work in radio. So in the 1930s, Thompson did a lot of work singing on the radio.
If you ever come back, I'll be so nice to you, to you. If you never come back, I'll be with the crazies pushing up the daisies. I watch the clock on the wall, wait for your step in the hall. It's hard to believe, hard to conceive, it's over, all over, nothing at all.
I didn't super understand that in the olden times, radio programs were almost like TV shows. There would be an hour-long segment that would be at the same time every week, and it would be a chorus of women singing pop hits or whatever. So Thompson was involved in a lot of different radio programs, bopping around from different radio stations, and she was quite successful at it. A couple of the radio programs include the Lucky Strike Hit Parade, the Chesterfield radio program, and Tune-Up Time. Apparently these radio programs were often sponsored by, a cigarette company. And in 1939, a 16-year-old Judy Garland was a guest on the Tune-Up Time radio program. So Thompson and Judy Garland met and became very good friends. Later in life, Thompson would be the godmother to Liza Minnelli. What Thompson was most known for was her groundbreaking vocal arrangements. So she wasn't just singing songs, she was arranging songs, doing harmonies, and telling people to sing different parts of the songs and different speeds, and changing what the song was originally meant to sound like. She had this very jazzy, bluesy style, which was not a thing that white people were really doing at this time. I believe she got some pushback when she told her parents that she was going to be a jazz singer. So part of why Thompson was so popular on the radio is because she was inventing these new arrangements of these songs, and her sound was very exciting and fresh. In 1937, she was going to be in a Schubert Broadway production called Hooray for What? But then, apparently, the Schuberts wanted to turn Hooray for What into a bosomy chorus girl revue, and Lee Schubert felt that Thompson was not sexy enough. People just constantly telling this poor woman that she's not hot. Having her Broadway dreams crushed was a very pivotal moment for her, and she swore off Broadway forever. Then, in 1944, her friend Hugh Martin helped her get a job as a vocal arranger at MGM, because at this time, movie studios were still making a lot of musicals. She was a vocal coach for tons of stars of the era. Judy Garland, Lena Horne, Frank Sinatra, and June Allison, to name a few. She was a vocal arranger on various movies, like Ziegfeld Follies, The Harvey Girls, Till the Clouds Roll By, Good News, and The Pirate. If you're like me and you watch Be Kind Rewind here on YouTube, you will know that The Pirate was a troubled Judy Garland project. Judy Garland struggled with substance abuse, and that made her very unreliable. She would often not show up to set, would cost studios a lot of money, delaying productions. Kay Thompson was often contemptuous of Garland's lack of discipline and her reliance on pills. "I got so tired of taking care of her," she told a friend. But Garland became family for Thompson, who often traveled with her and her young children, Liza and Lorna. The Pirate, however, proved to be Thompson's nadir at MGM. Garland missed rehearsals and shoots. Years later, when the Pirate came up in a conversation, Thompson looked at a friend with an arched eyebrow. "Druggaroonies," she said, which I feel like is not super empathetic towards your friend who is struggling with addiction. Then, in 1947, she quit MGM. She was tired of working for a studio. So instead, she started a Vegas nightclub act. It was called Kay Thompson and the Williams Brothers.
It's a real thrill, folks, to bring back for their third appearance on our evening television show one of the finest acts in show business today. Of course, by that I mean Miss Kay Thompson and the Williams Brothers.
Gather round, boys, 'cause I got something to say. Gather round quick, boys, I repeat, boys, I gotta get it said today.
She was the star, and the four Williams brothers were her backup. As a side note, at this time, she started an affair with Andy Williams. When they met, he was like 19, and she was almost 40. We're not getting into a lot of her personal life, but there's a lot of affairs and intense falling outs with friends and a lot of just drama. She was kind of an intense woman, and that intensity, I think, bled into her personal relationships. Her nightclub show was very dynamic. So at that time, it was normal for people to stand on a stage at a microphone and maybe sway around a little bit. But Kay Thompson and the Williams brothers were moving around the stage and doing little bits. They hung the microphones from the rafters, which was not a thing at the time. And within a year, they were the highest paid nightclub act in the world.
She was the highest paid. She was the first person to crack the $1 million ceiling. She just was chic and new and different. She wrote the material. She designed the wardrobe that she wore, which was slacks. You know, most restaurants back then had dress codes where they couldn't even come in. And she'd show up and defy or try to defy the dress code and get in. Some places she didn't get in. But she would make headlines with it, and she would use that to help sell her line of pants, which were marketed exclusively at Saks Fifth Avenue.
She wrote the songs, and Robert Alton did the choreography. One day, Thompson was late for a photo session at Alton's house. "I drove the car across a golf course. Bob's house was right there. I got out of the car, and I opened the door and went a few steps, and he said, 'Who do you think you are, coming here 5 minutes late?' And I said, 'I'm Eloise. I'm 6. So within the lore of Eloise, this is considered when the character was created, her doing a little bit with her nightclub choreographer. But according to the Sam Irvin biography, she did the Eloise bit throughout her entire life. Her middle name is Louise, so Eloise is named after her. Eloise was an imaginary friend she had as a child and sort of an alter ego. And so at many points in her life, she would act as Eloise as sort of a comedy bit. Like when she was working on radio programs and doing vocal arrangements, she would do Eloise to get the room to pay attention to her. There's another bit of Eloise lore that you will often see speculated about, which is that Eloise is based on Liza Minnelli, because she was a little girl and Kay Thompson was her godmother. So perhaps Liza served as inspiration for this Eloise character. But the longer I researched it, the more I felt like that's not what's happening. Eloise really just feels like Kay Thompson's alter ego. So she would do this Eloise voice all the time, and she would do it on the telephone with her friends. And she would do it on the phone with her friend Dee Dee Ryan. Dee Dee Ryan was an editor at Harper's Bazaar. She worked under Diana Vreeland. Diana Vreeland was the fashion editor at Harper's Bazaar and went on to be editor-in-chief at Vogue. So Dee Dee Ryan would hear Kay Thompson do this Eloise voice over the phone, and she was like, you have to make an Eloise book. And she connected her with artist Hilary Knight. Kay would call me and do Eloise on the phone. She would say, "This is Eloise," in that funny little voice. I knew nothing about technology, but I finally said, "Kay, you really ought to get a tape recorder and write this down." This was the 1950s, and I did not even know what a tape recorder was. I said, "There is a fellow across the hall, a great friend of mine, Hilary Knight."
I talked to a friend one day who called. She used to call every Sunday, and she used to be with Harper's Bazaar, and that's a good place to be from. And she called and she said, "Kay, darling, I don't want to talk to you. I'd like very much to speak to Eloise."
So I went to the telephone. I said, "Yes, what is it?"
Now, the same Harper's Bazaar girl said, "You've got to write it down." And she said, "I have the artist who is Hilary Knight, and naturally, you know what happened. I met Hilary Knight."
Hilary Knight had done a drawing of a prissy girl and a scraggly girl looking at each other, and Dee Dee Ryan thought that the scraggly little girl looked like Eloise. And she told Kay, "I have a drawing of Eloise," and Kay got very excited. And so then Kay Thompson and Hilary Knight met. Hilary Knight was the son of two very successful artists, and he was working as a magazine illustrator at the time he met Kay. He did art for Mademoiselle magazine, House and Garden, Good Housekeeping, and Gourmet. Dee Dee took me to meet Kay. I believe it was her last performance at the Persian Room. We went to the lobby, and I remember sitting with her, and she told me about the book. We pretty much started working on it right away. Kay gave Hilary 12 lines on a piece of paper and handed it to him. "If you're interested, get in touch with me." Then I spoke a few words of Eloise and left. He then sent her a Christmas card with a drawing of Santa Claus and Eloise on it, and they started working on an Eloise picture book together. They worked together on it. It was a very fun collaboration. Kay would write words and Hilary would illustrate them, and they built out this book. At this time, Kay lived in the Plaza Hotel. She had a gig performing in the Persian Room at the Plaza. The Persian Room was like a lounge kind of a thing. So Kay and Hilary worked together in Kay's room at the Plaza. Then Jack Goodman at Simon & Schuster agreed to publish this book. But a week before publishing, Hilary Knight signed a one-page agreement. Kay would own the copyright to Knight's drawings, and any future Eloise books would be locked in at the same royalty split as the first, 70% for Thompson and 30% to Knight. "I totally trusted her," Knight said. "I signed it without really looking at it." Which at this point, Kay Thompson was a very highly paid, successful, famous performer, and Hilary Knight was an illustrator sort of just starting his career. So despite those kind of poor terms, Hilary Knight signed the agreement and the book was published. It was published in November of 1955, and it was pitched as a book for grown-ups. The tagline on the book is "A book for precocious grown-ups." Kay Thompson did not consider it a children's book. She considered that kind of an insult.
To her dying day, she said it was not a child's book. It offended her.
She didn't like children very much, and she would waltz into Doubledays and pick up stacks of her books out of the juvenile section and plunk them down in the grown-up section and then walk out.
And when the book came out, the New York Times didn't review it because they didn't understand what it was. They were like, it's a picture book, but it's for adults. But Life magazine ran a story on it on December 12th, just sort of showing, there's this new book called Eloise. Look at that. And the Eloise book ended up being very successful, obviously. The book itself is about a 6-year-old girl living in the Plaza Hotel. You'll notice that Kay Thompson also lived in the Plaza Hotel. Eloise lives in the penthouse with her nanny, who's a rather plump English woman. The book tells you how much she weighs in stone, which as a child I thought was weird because I didn't know what that was. Eloise has a dog that looks like a cat named Weenie. Weenie is a pug, and I don't particularly think that pugs look like cats. The way that Weenie is drawn in the book kind of maybe looks like a cat, but other interpretations of him don't look like a cat at all. Eloise also has a turtle named Skipperdy. She does not go to school. She has a tutor who comes to the penthouse, and she likes provoking him and making him very upset. So, like, he's trying to teach her French, and she's repeating what he says and making him very angry, and they have screaming matches. And the book is kind of just little vignettes of Eloise entertaining herself by terrorizing this hotel. She seems to really like upsetting adults, like upsetting her tutor, and then also upsetting the guests at the hotel, just generally inconveniencing them, pretending to have dropped things in a packed elevator, scraping sticks on the walls of the hallway. She runs up and down stairs and presses elevator buttons and rides all around the hotel. The page for this is a page that folds out, so it shows all the different floors of the plaza and a little diagram of her running around. She also goes into different rooms and imagines different scenarios, like going into an empty room and imagining that she's conducting a meeting. It's funny that Kay didn't consider this a book for children because it's very much a child fantasy, being unsupervised with unlimited money and a very fancy playground, annoying adults all the time and never getting in trouble. But when I was a kid, and also now as an adult, I was not really into Eloise. I was a very nervous and rule-following child, and so the fact that she was causing all this trouble and upsetting everyone on purpose was very stressful to me. I didn't like it. And now as an adult, I'm like, why is this child unsupervised? Her parents are basically out of the picture. Her dad isn't mentioned, and her mom is jet-setting around the world attending fashion shows and stuff. She has Nanny, but Nanny doesn't seem to be watching her most of the time. If I were an employee of this hotel, I'd be like, God damn, it's that 6-year-old again. I guess we can't kick her out, 'cause her mom's footing the bill. And if I was a guest of this hotel, I'd be like, oh, you let a 6-year-old just like run around? I'm never staying here again. I don't trust you guys' judgment. Which, to be clear, I don't think it's Eloise's fault. Sometimes people talk about Eloise and they're like, ugh, she's a brat, I hate her. And I'm like, yeah, it's not really her fault, though. If you were an unsupervised first grader in the plaza, what would you be doing? It's sort of more of a failure of the adults in her life, which is kind of just sad. Like, Eloise is alone most of the time, there's no other kids, and all of the adults in her life seem kind of annoyed with her. After learning a lot about Kay Thompson, this does very much feel like a book Kay Thompson would have written, because the whole setup and everything that's going on is sort of comedic in a dark, kind of messed up way. But even though it stressed me out as a kid, I can acknowledge that it was very groundbreaking and meaningful in the 1950s to have a character like Eloise. A lot of characters were very prim and proper and rule-following, and Eloise was like this little rebel.
Well, Kay really, back in the 50s, this was, the Leave It to Beaver, milk and cookies, very sweet sort of family values and everything. And Kay's creation of the Eloise character, this was a little girl without parental supervision. She was incredibly rebellious and had an imagination. I mean, Kay very purposefully gave this young girl an independent mind.
I can obviously see why it resonated with children so much, even though that wasn't the intention. Though, one unintended consequence of it not having been for children is that the book is long. This book is 68 pages long. And it's a picture book, but there's still a lot of text. I was reading it and I was like, there's a lot more Eloise than I remember there being. If I were a parent and I had to read this to a child, I would be very annoyed. Which I talked to my mom because she read it to me and she's dyslexic. And she was like, oh yeah. I'd be reading it like, will she notice if I skip 5 pages at a time? To be fair, the book doesn't really have a plot, so she probably could have gotten away with that. And within all this text, there's a lot of iconic lines. I don't really want to read out a bunch of lines of Eloise. 1, because there's a lot of iconic lines. And 2, because if I don't read out your personal favorite line, you're going to leave me an angry comment about it. So let's just assume that whatever your favorite line is, that's also my favorite line. We both have such good taste. Now, the text is iconic, especially our favorite line. But I think more iconic is the art. Hilary Knight used a very limited color palette. Everything's in black and white and pink. And a detail I've always liked is that whatever Eloise is imagining is drawn in all pink line work to sort of differentiate it from what's happening in reality. The art is very sketchy and it's done in pen, so the line work has a lot of texture. The art is very detailed. There's a lot of architectural drawings of the interior of the plaza and also Eloise's room. Knight was able to alleviate the sardonic darkness of Thompson's text by spoofing Eloise's pomposity, splattering her across every page in a helter-skelter free-for-all. There was an ingenious quality to his drawings, an economy of line, almost as if they were preliminary sketches. Hilary Knight's art is so good and so integral to Eloise's success. There's so much confidence and expression in his line work, which, while we're talking about art, if you'd like to improve your art skills, or really any skill, you may be interested in the sponsor of today's video, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes in so many categories: graphic design, video editing, music theory, coding, nonfiction writing, freelancing, all sorts of stuff, is my point. Whether you want a skill that you can use in your career or you want to develop a hobby, Skillshare has lots of classes on drawing and sketching. I really like Hilary Knight's ink line work. I really enjoyed using fine liners when I was in high school. I had all the different weights of microns in my pencil case, if that means anything to you. I liked this ink drawing techniques class by Yukon Shimizu. And you can filter Skillshare classes by software or material. So like if you specifically want classes using Adobe Illustrator or Canva or Final Cut Pro. There are also learning paths, which are curated collections of classes made to master a specific skill. If you want to learn drawing or something else, you can join Skillshare to learn a new skill from scratch or master a skill you already have. If you're interested in trying Skillshare, you can click my link in the description. The first 500 people to use my link will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So, the Eloise book was very successful. There was a lot of merch and advertising using Eloise. Eloise was used to advertise for things like cars and the Plaza Hotel. The Eloise brand had a very positive relationship with the Plaza, and the Plaza integrated Eloise into their hotel. Kay staged tea parties where she would do the Eloise bit, and she helped create a special Plaza menu for children with teeny weenies and eggs Eloise. In the lobby, there was a phone you could pick up to hear Kay's voice doing the Eloise voice. And they set up a room to be Eloise themed so guests could walk in and have this Eloise experience. Kay Thompson traveled to Dallas to launch Eloise clothing at Neiman Marcus. Eloise dolls were sold at Lord & Taylor. The list of items for purchase, licensed by Thompson's company Eloise Limited, included an Eloise record, a life-size doll, clothing, Eloise French postcards, wigs, luggage, and toys. You could even buy Eloise's emergency kit, a hat box containing bubblegum, crayons, turtle food, sunglasses, soap, notepads, and a "Please Don't Disturb" sign from the Plaza. And in 1956, there was the first adaptation of Eloise. It was on Playhouse 90 by CBS. This was an anthology series, so every episode would be a different 90-minute drama. The episode starred Evelyn Rudy as Eloise. Originally, the plan was that Kay Thompson would do the Eloise voice into a microphone. She would be just off camera, and Evelyn Rudy would be lip-syncing to her. They practiced doing it this way for 3 weeks, and then 1 a.m. the day of, the producer called Evelyn Rudy's parents to be like, "This isn't working. Can the kid just say the lines?" And so they did a rehearsal that morning, and she did fine. But Kay Thompson was pissed. She showed up with lawyers. No reruns, no sequels, no marketing in her lifetime. The little girl's representatives had to agree that while she could say in her publicity materials that she had played Eloise, she could never say that she was Eloise. "I am Eloise," Kay said bluntly. "No one else, ever, not as long as I live." And after this, she swore off adaptations of Eloise forever. Then, in 1957, Kay Thompson was in Funny Face, a musical movie starring Fred Astaire and Audrey Hepburn. Kay Thompson plays Maggie Prescott, who is a magazine editor. The character was loosely based on Diana Vreeland. Fred Astaire plays a photographer named Dick Avery. The character was based on Richard Avedon, a photographer who contributed photographs for the movie. So, in the movie, Kay Thompson and Fred Astaire's characters work for a fashion magazine, and Kay Thompson's character wants to create a new, intellectual fashion look. So they take one of their models to do a photo shoot in a bookshop, and Audrey Hepburn is an employee at this bookshop. He's very into, philosophy. They use her in the background of some of their photographs, and Fred Astaire decides that maybe we should make Audrey Hepburn a model. What a crazy idea. And we keep saying that Audrey Hepburn has a funny face.
I think her face is perfectly funny.
And like she couldn't possibly be a model. And Audrey Hepburn is like, who, me? But that goes against all my principles. But there's this philosopher who she wants to meet who lives in Paris. And Fred Astaire is like, well, if you agree to do this, then we're going to go to Paris and you're going to model for Fashion Week or whatever. And so Audrey Hepburn agrees to model. And they go to Paris, and then Audrey Hepburn and Fred Astaire have a romance, even though at the time of filming this movie, he was like 30 years older than her, and the two of them live happily ever after. It's very much a wish fulfillment movie. Feels almost like a Wattpad story. You get scouted as a model and go to Paris and date Fred Astaire, I guess. What every woman in 1957 wanted, maybe. Kay Thompson's performance in this movie was very well received. The magazine editor character is very fun, and she's in multiple musical numbers. She does a number at the beginning of the musical called Think Pink.
And there is not the slightest excuse for plum abuse or chartreuse. Think Pink!
Then she does a song with Fred Astaire and Audrey Hepburn called Bonjour Paris. And Kay Thompson does a duet with Fred Astaire called Clap Your Hands, which Audrey Hepburn has gone to the philosopher's beatnik, smoke-filled apartment. There's a bunch of bohemians all talking about philosophy. And this philosopher who she idolizes, like, makes a pass at her, which upsets her. Kay Thompson and Fred Astaire come to collect her because she's supposed to be doing this fashion show. And they, like, sneak in? I don't remember. I watched this movie kind of a while ago. Unrelated to this video, which, like, what a coincidence that I watched this movie for, like, no reason several years ago, and I wasn't about to re-watch it for this video. But Kay Thompson and Fred Astaire go in to get Audrey Hepburn, and as part of it, they're, like, in disguise or something, and they sing a duet and dance together, and apparently her and Fred Astaire did not get along, so doing this duet together was a little bit challenging. Fred Astaire seemed to take an instant dislike to Kay Thompson. He liked willowy women, Gersh said. There was no reason for it. She never did anything to him. She found him a prima donna and me to Audrey. I think he was irritated to be doing this duet with her and also didn't like that she played the piano as part of this number. But Kay Thompson got to be in musical numbers and play this sort of Diana Vreeland parody, and it was very well received. People thought she was sort of the highlight of this movie. Then she got back from doing Funny Face, and she wanted to do an Eloise book about Paris. This ended up being Eloise in Paris, which was published in 1957. Simon & Schuster paid for Hilary Knight and Kay Thompson to go to Paris to do research for this book. And so they spent time there. Hilary did a bunch of sketches. Kay took a bunch of notes. When they got back, Kay Thompson was like, we didn't get enough stuff, we have to go back. And Simon & Schuster was like, well, we're not paying for you to go again. And so Kay Thompson made a sponsorship deal with the airline Sabina. They would give her 4 tickets to Paris in exchange for product placement in the Eloise book. So on 3 pages of Eloise in Paris, there is product placement for this airline. The plot of the book is that Eloise's mother sends for her to come to Paris. The mom isn't seen in the book, though. And so Eloise and Nanny sort of gallivant across Paris, go to a bunch of famous landmarks and do a bunch of cliche Paris things. The new thing in this book is the color blue. So when Eloise and Nanny leave the plaza, suddenly blue gets added to the color palette of the drawings. And it is a really amazing effect because at this point Eloise has been black, white, and pink. And so turning the page to the color blue is very exciting. There's also a ton of French words sprinkled into the text, which if I was reading this to the child, I would be so irritated because I don't know how to say anything in French. I don't know how it's supposed to sound. I guess the argument is that it was never intended for children, so they weren't thinking about how you would read it to a child. While in Paris, Eloise gets a dress from Dior, and this dress was actually designed by Christian Dior. Kay Thompson had a lot of connections, knew a lot of people, and so her and Hilary Knight went to Dior and had him design a dress. His assistant, Yves Saint Laurent, was also there. He handed the drawing to Hilary Knight, and so there's actual Dior in this book. The end of the book, Nanny and Eloise go back to the plaza, and the bathroom is filled with pigeons because Eloise left the bathroom window open. Then, for Kay Thompson's birthday, Hilary Knight made an Eloise portrait. She hung it in the bedroom of her plaza suite, and you can see it in a TV interview that she did to talk about Eloise.
It was done by Hilary Knight, especially for my birthday, and Hilary did the illustrations in the book, Eloise. Isn't this absolutely perfect?
It looks like one of those old-fashioned portraits of royalty. Then, later, Kay Thompson gave it to the plaza, and it was hung in the plaza's Palm Court beginning in 1957. But then, in 1960, the portrait was stolen. There was a debutante ball in the plaza the night before, so there was speculation that it was debutantes who stole it.
Walter Cronkite announced on national TV, Eloise kidnapped from the Plaza Hotel. Kay offered a reward. There was a great amount of excitement, but the portrait failed to show up.
It was not found until 1962. Hilary Knight got an anonymous phone call giving him directions to a dumpster in New York. And in the dumpster was the portrait, but without its frame. Hilary Knight had never super loved the portrait. He did it kind of fast, and it was never intended to be on public display. It was a gift for Kay Thompson. So he did not give it back to the plaza. He put it in his own personal storage. But in 1964, he made a replacement and gave that to the plaza. There is speculation that Thompson orchestrated the alleged theft herself. "Oh, I'm sure that's what happened," Knight says when asked, "because of things she said to me, and she was very savvy about how to get publicity." At this time, the Eloise brand was sort of winding down, and the plaza took out some of the Eloise tie-in stuff. And so it's possible that that pissed off Kay Thompson, and so as a publicity stunt, she stole her own painting. Sort of getting back at the plaza, too. Like, oh, you don't want Eloise stuff? Fine. Then you don't get any. Then, in 1958, we get the book Eloise at Christmas Time. The idea of Eloise at Christmas Time was originally in a 1957 issue of Good Housekeeping, but then the idea was expanded into a full book. Again, not really a plot, just sort of Christmas-themed vignettes. Eloise goes caroling, she gives out presents. The text is much more rhymey, like how commercials around Christmas time feel the need to make everything a nursery rhyme. The whole book doesn't rhyme, but there's a lot more rhyming elements. There's also a fun page that has the hotel floor plan on it. I like all the pages that are different. And I believe the ending of the book was changed when it was reissued in 1999. Simon & Schuster reissued the book in 1999 with new art by Hilary Knight. He altered the closing page that depicted Eloise showing off all of her Christmas presents to a drawing of hotel staff with presents they received from Eloise. Knight commented, "It's a better note to end on." But I had trouble finding what this original ending looked like. I tried to look at old listings of Eloise books, but to no avail. Then, in 1959, they published Eloise in Moscow. Originally, the idea was to do Eloise in England, but it was decided that Eloise going to Moscow would be funnier. Spoiler alert, it was not. This is, in my opinion, the least fun Eloise book. Kay Thompson and Hilary Knight went to Moscow, which this was the height of the Cold War, so they spent 4 weeks in Moscow feeling very watched, though Hilary Knight did say that they ate caviar at every meal. Because it is set in the Soviet Union, and because Kay did not have a great time in Moscow, the tone of the book is very dreary. There's giant swaths of gray in this book. All of the drawings of the people look sad. There is a new color in this book, which is yellow, but that does not make the book feel cheerful. And Eloise talks about being watched. Here's what there is absolutely none of in Moscow: privacy. Everyone knows what everybody's doing every minute of the day in Moscow. Here's what you are: never alone. If you are a diplomat, you can say the food is good. Actually, it is absolutely not. That didn't have to do with privacy, I just wanted to read that bit. And so to communicate this idea of not having any privacy, there is a little man in a trench coat on every page. And on some pages, there's a ton of people. It's like a crowd scene. They're out and about in Moscow. So obviously it's very easy to hide a little man in a trench coat. But some of the pages, like when Eloise is in her hotel room, you really have to look for him. There's a page where Eloise is in her hotel and you can see the man in the mirror. And when she's taking a bath, you can see the man through like an air vent. So that was fun, a little bit of a Where's Waldo element. Eloise and Nanny do a bunch of Moscow-themed things. They go to the ballet, they go to a circus. There's a massive fold-out page that shows the Kremlin. They have a tour guide who's taking them around, and she speaks in sort of all capital sort of block letters. And at the end, Eloise goes to see the ambassador. The cover of the book looks like a newspaper, which later editions have been changed so that all of the text on the cover is references to Kay Thompson and Hilary Knight. I looked it up, I was like, was it always references to them? No. This book is Hilary Knight's favorite, which it is stylistically quite different from the other Eloise books, so that must have been fun to do as an illustrator. But the book did not do well. Possibly people were not into the fact that it was Russia themed, and people didn't think the text was as funny. Which, to be fair, it is not. I don't know what the actual page count is, but I think partly because it's so not fun, it felt long. It felt like the longest one. Then, in 1962, Kay Thompson suddenly moved to Rome, and she took an advance for a fifth Eloise book, Eloise Takes a Bath. It has the W in there, so you know you're supposed to say it like that. The plot is that Eloise takes a bath and keeps the tap running and ends up flooding the plaza. Kay Thompson felt uninspired, so she started working on a non-Eloise project, a children's book called The Fox and the Fig. Hilary Knight didn't want to do it, and she sort of auditioned several other illustrators, including Andy Warhol, but she ended up going with playwright Mart Crowley. He was not really an illustrator. He was a writer. He wrote The Boys in the Band. But it's possible that's part of why Kay Thompson wanted to work with him, because he would have been easier to direct and push around. But she didn't like the direction the book was going, and she stopped returning his calls and stopped answering the door for him. Then, in 1963, Grace Kelly came to the plaza. At this point, she was Princess Grace of Monaco, and she had her kids with her, and she was upset that there was no Eloise portrait. She was like, oh, my kids really wanted to see that. Because if you remember, it was recovered in 1962, but not put back on display. So the plaza called Kay Thompson, like, we need another Eloise portrait. And Kay Thompson was like, well, tell Hilary to do it. And so a new Eloise portrait was unveiled in 1964, which was great publicity for Eloise. So since Eloise was back in the public consciousness, the publisher was like, can you please work on the fifth Eloise book? In July 1964, Ursula Nordstrom, who was in charge of children's books at Harper & Row, bought the front cover of Publishers Weekly to announce Eloise Takes a Bath. Hilary Knight finished his final sketches for Eloise Takes a Bath, but Kay rejected them, so they shelved the project again. They tried to work on it again in 1966, but the energy was very bad. Kay Thompson wanted to do it like a storyboard, so she had a bunch of drawings hanging up on clotheslines in her apartment. Thompson would compliment Knight's sketches. That's great, Hill. But the next morning, he recalled, that drawing that was so glorious would have a big clot of rubber cement on it, and there would be a piece of paper over the drawing. Kay Thompson was a very driven and controlling person, so it seems kind of like she was upset that she couldn't just do the drawings herself.
She was so controlling and such a control freak that, she wanted to really do it herself. I personally think that Kay began to be resentful that people identified Eloise more with his illustrations than they did with her text.
Despite the rough collaborative environment, they were able to finish Eloise Takes a Bath, and it almost went to print, but then Kay Thompson pulled it at the last minute. She then pulled the 3 sequels from publication, so Paris, Christmastime, and Moscow. And at this point, she believed that the original Eloise was the only good one. In 1968, her beloved pug died of diabetes, and she was also running out of money, in part because she spent quite a bit of money bailing out Judy Garland. So in 1968, she moved back to New York. And then, probably for money, she re-released the first Eloise book and sort of leveraged that into getting accommodations at the plaza. She was like, look, I'm publishing Eloise, which helps you guys, so you should let me stay here. Then her and Hilary Knight tried working on Eloise Takes a Bath one more time in 1969. But while Hilary Knight was drawing, Kay Thompson tried to put her hand over his hand.
And I started to draw. And her hand came over and took my hand in hers and pushed the pencil around. And I thought, that's it. That was the end of our relationship. I never spoke to her again.
Then in 1972, the Plaza kicked out Kay Thompson because they were like, you're not making Eloise. Why are we letting you stay here? And so Liza Minnelli, Kay Thompson's goddaughter, sort of convinced Kay Thompson to stay with her. Kay Thompson was very proud, so she didn't want to stay with Liza Minnelli, but Liza framed it as, you're going to be my interior decorator, and so I need you here in the apartment. And then at some point, Liza Minnelli ended up getting a second apartment, so she lived in one apartment, Kay Thompson lived in the other apartment. Also in 1972, and this is a little bit random, there was an expose that Dr. Max Jacobson was giving high-profile celebrities amphetamine shots. They were vitamin B12 shots that actually had amphetamines in them. And so his clients would come to him and pretend like they were getting vitamins when really they were getting speed. His clients included Truman Capote, Tennessee Williams, and JFK. Kay Thompson was not named in the original expose, but she was a patient of his. And at this point in her life, she was struggling with addiction. Kay Thompson continued to work in show business, and she turned down adaptations and Eloise opportunities. She would string people along, hop around from idea to idea, but never actually do anything. In 1988, she got a call from Francis Ford Coppola. He wanted to do an Eloise adaptation in the movie New York Stories. New York Stories is an anthology movie. It has 3 different segments, one from Martin Scorsese, one from Francis Ford Coppola, and one from Woody Allen. And each of the segments are themed around New York. And so Coppola wanted to do Eloise because Eloise is a Plaza New York icon. During the phone call, Kay Thompson would answer either as herself or as Eloise. The conversation lasted hours, and when Thompson finally made it clear that she was saying no, Coppola replied wearily, "All right, good night to both of you." But the segment that he did for New York Stories was still very Eloise inspired. It's called Life Without Zoe, and it's about a rich child with absent parents living in a hotel with a butler and a little dog. The plot itself is about like a jewel thief or something. I don't know. I tried to watch it. It's not good. It is considered not good, which, you know, it has not great child acting in it, which is why I had to stop watching it. And that's separate from whatever the plot is. I will never know. Life Without Zoe was co-written with Sofia Coppola, who was 17 at the time. So possibly what happened is that she wanted to do an Eloise adaptation. In 1998, Donald Trump bought the Plaza. I didn't know he did that. And the following year, he wanted to use Eloise to promote the hotel, and Kay Thompson said no. Trump had bought the hotel with a $400 million loan. The Plaza's debt grew to $600 million, so he made a bankruptcy deal and then later sold the hotel. In 1995, when Eloise was having its 40th anniversary, Kay Thompson called up Skylar Hook, who is the manager of Books of Wonder in New York City, to voice dissatisfaction with a 40th anniversary window display because it did not feature Thompson's name in its trademark marquee fashion. "What is the title of that book in the window?" she asked. Hook replied, "Eloise." "That is incorrect," screamed Thompson. "The title of the book is Kay Thompson's Eloise." Meanwhile, Hilary Knight was locked out of Eloise. He couldn't do anything with it because of that agreement that he signed. At some point over the years, he had gotten a lawyer to try and renegotiate, but that didn't end up going anywhere. So instead, he kept himself busy with a lot of other projects. He illustrated a lot of Broadway posters and over 50 books, 9 of which he also wrote. And he also did more magazine illustrations. And now, at this point, I'm going to fill time and talk for a moment because I want to show more of his art on screen, but I don't really have anything else to say about it. Some of it seems sort of Art Nouveau inspired, which that's the style that his mother drew in, so that makes sense. But overall, just a lot of really cool art over the course of a long and sort of strange career. In her later years, Kay Thompson became increasingly reclusive. She would only talk to people on the phone, and her health started to decline. She was staying in the apartment that Liza Minnelli was paying for, and Liza Minnelli got a call from the building manager saying, "The smell is so bad, the other people in the apartment are starting to complain. You have to do something about it." And so Liza Minnelli went to check on Kay Thompson and found out that she was in decline and sort of living in a hoarder situation. So Kay Thompson moved in with Liza Minnelli and had a nurse and passed away in 1998. And basically immediately after her death, her estate, which was run by her sister Blanche, got Eloise going again. So in 1999, the Plaza hosted a black and pink ball that was Eloise themed, and they re-released the 3 Eloise sequels. So they were finally back in print. Then in 2002, Eloise Takes a Bath was released. The plot is that Eloise is taking a bath and she is imagining various aquatic adventures. But meanwhile, her bath is flooding the entire plaza. And the manager is pissed. He's like, the water has ruined everything. We were going to have a Venetian party, but now the ballroom is flooded. And then there's a fold-out page of the Venetian ball, and everyone's in costumes enjoying the water. There's a lot less text than the previous Eloise books, and the color palette isn't as limited. This book was basically written and illustrated by Hilary Knight. He took the original drafts and he had Mark Crowley help him reconfigure it into a new version of the book. This book is fun. I like the art. It's a very simple premise, but I think Eloise thrives on having a simple premise. The Eloise estate also greenlit adaptations for the first time since 1956. So in 2003, there was an Eloise live-action movie called Eloise at the Plaza. It was a TV movie which aired on ABC. I remember watching it on Disney Channel.
Sofia Vassilieva and Julie Andrews star in the Disney Channel premiere of Eloise at the Plaza, Monday at 8/7 Central on Disney Channel.
It stars Sofia Vassilieva as Eloise and Julie Andrews as Nanny. In the DVD behind the scenes, they talk about how Julie Andrews is playing against type by playing this sort of goofy, sort of more crass character. And they also talk about how they had to pad Julie Andrews because the character of Nanny is supposed to be very plump and Julie Andrews is not.
We did put a padding on her bottom because she's actually very fit and Nanny is slightly less fit. So we just wanted to give a little bit more of this kind of shape and we needed to add something to the posterior.
It's really quite a treat at the end of the day to get out of this wig and out of all the wonderful costume that makes me look like Nanny and say, oh, I clean up really rather well.
And then you look at her in the movie and you're like, that looks like an average weight lady. Like, what are we talking about? But it was 2003. People were weird about weight. Weirder than now. Julie Andrews seems like she's having a lot of fun with this role, which Princess Diaries was around the same time. So I think at this point, Julie Andrews just wanted to do fun kids movies. Now, the original Eloise book and also the subsequent Eloise books do not have a plot. It's just like one-liners and silly circumstances. So what is this movie about? The Plaza is hosting a debutante ball, and the Prince of Kushin is coming to assess the Plaza because he wants to host a trade conference in New York. And so he's looking at a bunch of different hotels to decide where he's going to host it. And so the manager of the Plaza, Mr. Salamone, is very stressed out. He is played by Jeffrey Tambor. Eloise knows about the ball, and she very much wants to go, because her mother was a debutante. The woman who's running the debutante ball is named Mrs. Daniels, and she has brought her daughter Molly. She's trying to set her daughter up with a man named Randall, who went to Yale. But Molly is not interested. Later, Eloise is snooping around, and she overhears that the prince is coming. And she's like, perfect, the prince is going to be my date to the ball. Also, Eloise is trying to set up Nanny with Sir Wilkes. Sir Wilkes also lives at the Plaza. I didn't realize until researching this that sometimes hotels, such as the Plaza, have apartments, like condos. It's not just guest rooms for people staying a short period of time. There's also long-term residents. And the plaza has had various numbers of condos over the course of its history. So Sir Wilkes lives down the hall from them, and Nanny has a crush on him. But since he's a rich knight, she's like, I can't ask him out. So Eloise is going to do some scheming. Then Eloise's tutor leaves behind his book, and Nanny tells Eloise to return it to him. So Eloise goes down to the lobby, and she meets a boy who's about her age. He says his name is Leon, even though he's clearly lying. He goes to boarding school in New York, and he's very lonely. So she takes him around to have some fun. Eloise wants to find clues about the prince, and so they go down to the laundry. This is one of my most distinct memories of this movie, because they take off Leon's boarding school jacket, which is bright red. Eloise says it's not good for spying to stand out so much, and so they throw the jacket in with a load of white sheets. These are special sheets for the Prince of Cushin's hotel room. And so, of course, the red of the jacket bleeds onto the sheets, turning everything pink. And I think of that whenever I am sorting laundry. It made a strong impression on me as a child. Partially, I think, because it was exciting that things could turn pink, because I like pink. And partially because it was alarming that Eloise was ruining something. Her causing mischief stressed me out. Then Eloise and Leon run around and try and search people's rooms. They end up going to Mrs. Daniels' room, and they leave behind the tutor's book that I guess we've been carrying this whole time. Then they go down to the kitchens, and there's a fire. The kitchens are prepping food for the debutante ball, and they're doing that thing where you light alcohol on fire, and they create a massive fire, which Eloise extinguishes with the fire extinguisher. And they all act like, oh my god, the food is ruined! Eloise, the fire extinguisher, you got it all wet! Which the alternative is that the food all would have been burnt. So, like, whatever, it was already ruined. Then Eloise takes Leon to see the sights of New York, and they ride in a horse-drawn carriage. At this point is when we get a Hilary Knight cameo. He plays a street artist who is drawing Eloise and Leon. And then the montage has more drawings that Hilary Knight did especially for this movie. That was very exciting. I did not realize that's what was happening as a kid. And then rewatching the movie for this video, I was like, oh my god, that's Hilary Knight! I was like starstruck. Then when they're riding around in the carriage, Leon tells Eloise that his mother has passed away, and so his dad sent him away to boarding school. He repeats a quote in French that his mother used to say to him, and Eloise says Leon needs to tell his dad that he wants to live at home and not at boarding school. Meanwhile, Mr. Salamone is stressed that everything is ruined, the sheets for the prince and the food for the debutante ball. And then the attaché for the prince comes in and asks where the prince is. And Mr. Salamone is like, oh, well, he never showed up. And then we realize the mix-up, which is that the prince's son was dropped off at the plaza. The prince's son, Leon, which is not his real name. And so now the prince's son is missing. Which, like, you guys can't drop off an unaccompanied minor who is also a prince at the Plaza Hotel and then be shocked that something went wrong. Then Molly, Mrs. Daniels' daughter, goes down to the lobby to return the book, and she ends up meeting the tutor, and they instantly like each other. Mrs. Daniels meets Sir Wilkes and wants to go on a date with him, but Eloise orchestrates it so that Nanny crashes the date. And Sir Wilkes is like, thank God you're here, please stay. Eloise has to meet with her mother's lawyer, so Leon goes off on his own in New York, and he goes to the planetarium. Eloise's lawyer is like, you can't keep charging so much to the room. And now at this point, the police are looking for Leon. And Eloise is walking through the lobby and sees the photo of Leon, and she's like, oh, that's Leon. They're like, no, this is the Prince of Cushin. And then Eloise gets in trouble for taking the prince off around New York and then losing him. Again, not her fault, your guys' fault. But Eloise is determined to find him. So she asks the tutor about the French quote that Leon had said. It's a quote from A Little Prince that's like, if you want to find me, look for the stars. And so she goes to the planetarium, brings Leon's dad, and Leon and his dad reconcile. Then Eloise helps fix things. She recommends that the new menu for the debutante ball should be caviar and grilled cheese. And she recommends that they redecorate the prince's room to have a pink theme, since they can't get the pink out of the sheets. This all goes great, and then everyone goes to the debutante ball. And Eloise is wearing a dress that is a recreation of the dress that Dior designed for Eloise in Paris. And at the very end of the movie, like while this debutante ball is happening, Mr. Salamoni meets with Prunella Stickler, who is going to be their new events coordinator at the plaza. He's like, after today, we need someone else to handle these events. And Prunella is played by Christine Baranski. At the end of the movie, Eloise dumps a pitcher of water down a mail chute, and the water gets all over Prunella, which dumping water down a mail chute is what Eloise does at the end of the first book, kind of a parallel. Then she goes back to her room, and there's suitcases because her mom is home. We don't see the mom, but the mom is there. The end. This movie is cute. It's very stylized. They built a set of the plaza inspired by what the plaza looked like in the 50s and what it looks like in the book. They did a great recreation of Eloise's room. The costuming is very vintage inspired, and there's a lot of direct references to the books and the drawings. I would also like to mention the music. The score is amazing. And it won an Emmy for the score. Eloise does a lot of fourth wall breaks, talking to the audience, sort of emulating the narration style in the book. It's kind of as faithful as a live-action Eloise could be. The plot is kind of like whatever. Debutante ball and a lonely boy prince. If you told me to write an Eloise movie, I have no idea what I would do. So I guess this is fine. It also has a theme of speaking your mind, which I think is very on brand for Eloise. Leon is supposed to tell his dad that he's unhappy. Nanny and Sir Wilkes are supposed to tell each other they like each other. Molly is supposed to stand up to her mom and say that she doesn't want to marry Randall and she doesn't want to go to college. I forgot that was part of it. She's like, I don't want to go to Yale, Mom. I want to go to Paris and travel the world. It's just funny that's part of the conflict. Overall, good movie. Which this movie was filmed back to back with the second movie, which is Eloise at Christmas Time. So Prunella is now the events coordinator at the plaza, and Eloise sees that there is a man planning an event, and he is then rude to a bellhop. So now Eloise doesn't like him. Then we learn that Eloise's neighbor, Mrs. Thornton, has it out for Skipperty. She thinks that Skipperty tries to attack her dog. So Eloise goes to complain to Mr. Peabody, who is the owner of the hotel. She has to get past his secretary, Cornelia, and so she pranks her with a giant gift box. So she has a giant gift box delivered to the hotel with Cornelia's name on it. So Cornelia goes down to try and open the gift box because it's too big to go in the elevator. Meanwhile, Eloise sneaks in to talk to Mr. Peabody. And Mr. Peabody is like, don't worry about Mrs. Thornton. She's not going to be with us much longer. Then Mr. Peabody's daughter, Rachel, shows up. Her and her fiance, Brooks, are getting married at the plaza. And we see that Brooks, the fiance, is the man who is rude to the bellhop, so we don't like him. Then Eloise is helping her friend, Bill. Bill is like a waiter at the plaza. He delivers the room service to Nanny and Eloise every morning. He was in the first movie, he just wasn't relevant to the plot. He is played by Gavin Creel, who tragically passed away a few months ago. So Eloise is hanging out with Bill, and they're putting out silverware for an event. And then Prunella comes in with Rachel and Brooks. She's helping them plan their wedding. And we discover that Bill and Rachel dated 4 years ago. Housekeeping gives Eloise some of the Bill and Rachel gossip. And housekeeping has also been told to cease service to Mrs. Thornton. So now Eloise thinks that Mrs. Thornton is dead. Also, there's a subplot where Eloise is stressing out Nanny and Sir Wilkes, telling them that they need to get each other really great Christmas presents. The next day, Nanny and Eloise go shopping, and there is Toys R Us product placement. They go to the Toys R Us that was in Times Square. It's funny, these movies take place sort of outside of time, because they're very 50s inspired, but like it's not the 50s. Which is kind of my experience of reading the books. Like, I did not realize that they were from the 50s. I just thought books are weird sometimes. I don't know. I thought it was contemporary, but just weird. And I asked my mom, I was like, what did you think when you read the books? And she was like, oh, well, I thought they took place in the 70s. And I was like, because that's when you were reading them. And she was like, yeah. So I don't know if that's a common thing, Because there is a timeless element to Eloise. But please tell me if you also thought that Eloise was taking place when you were a child instead of the 1950s. Unless if you were a child during the 1950s, I guess. Then when they get back from shopping, Eloise sees Mrs. Thornton, and Nanny explains that Mrs. Thornton isn't dead, she's just moving out of the plaza. So Eloise goes to Mrs. Thornton's room, and Mrs. Thornton monologues about how her son married into the Bavarian royal family. He was going to send her money to keep her comfortable. But then he died, and the corrupt Bavarian government stole all of his money, and so now she has to move out. So Eloise goes to Mr. Peabody again. This time, to get past Cornelia, she has her pug, Weenie, steal her paycheck, which, like, what a well-trained pug. The pug is in, like, some ridiculous costume. And when I was watching this movie, I watched it with my parents. And at this point in the movie, my dad was tired and wanted to go to bed because he goes to bed very early. But he loves pugs. So as he was leaving, the pug came on screen and we were like, oh my God, you almost missed a pug. But then Mr. Peabody explains that Mrs. Thornton never had money, and her son did not marry into the Bavarian royal family. He just skipped out on her, and they can't just let her live there. Then Eloise spies on Brooks, Rachel's fiance, and she discovers that he is just pretending to be rich. He borrowed a lot of money to put on this facade of being wealthy, and once he marries Rachel, he's going to use her money to pay everyone back. Eloise goes to tell Mr. Peabody, but Cornelia calls security on her. So Eloise plans to get Rachel back together with Bill. She steals a centerpiece from an event and gives the flowers to Rachel from a secret admirer. And then Eloise goes to Rachel's wedding dress fitting, and Rachel tells her that her and Bill used to sing show tunes together. Then Eloise comes up with a scheme to get Bill and Rachel together at the same place. She uses spy equipment that she got as a Christmas present from Leon. She opens the present early and takes out like a spy watch and a walkie-talkie. She gets Brooks and Prunella to not show up for a wedding planning appointment, so Rachel shows up alone, and Eloise and Bill are already there at the piano singing. So then Eloise leaves so that Rachel and Bill will sing together, which takes very little convincing. I mean, obviously Bill and Rachel still like each other and they're going to get together by the end of the movie because that's how movies work. But it is funny that it's like you thought you were coming here to work on wedding planning and instead you're singing show tunes with another man. There is more singing in this movie than I thought there was going to be. I am convinced that I did not watch this as a child because I don't remember anything from it. And so I started watching it and I was like, oh, we sing show tunes in this movie. Okay. Then Prunella comes in and yells at Bill for not working, and Rachel makes her apologize. Then Eloise comes up with a scheme to get Bill and Rachel to go on a date. She has the concierge get her 2 tickets to Gypsy on Broadway. It's weird that the name of that show is a slur, right? Like, what do we do about that? You know? Then she makes Brooks think that there is a Harvard alumni party that night, which he is pretending to have gone to Harvard, and he doesn't want to get found out, so he leaves the hotel for the evening. Then Eloise gives Bill the tickets and tells him to ask out Rachel. He is apprehensive about it because, you know, this feels like a date. But he asks her, and she agrees. Eloise also gets a call from her mom that her mom can't fly in because of the snow. That night, Brooks gets back to the hotel and realizes that there was no Harvard alumni party. Then the next day, Bill has gone on his vacation. He was going to go on vacation because he didn't want to see his ex getting married. Also, it's Christmas time, and Eloise is upset because she thought that she had gotten Bill and Rachel back together and successfully ruined the wedding. So she goes to Rachel's hotel room to warn her about Brooks, but it's Brooks who opens the door, and he's making the most evil face imaginable. And then, to escalate his villainy, he locks Eloise in a basement closet. Kids' movies have very one-size-fits-all villains. Like, if you lie and marry a woman for her money, then you also would kidnap a child. Like, I don't know. Those are kind of different things. I'm not saying either of them are good. I'm just saying, you know, the child kidnapping is a bit intense. But Eloise has her walkie-talkie from the spy kit, so she uses it to contact Nanny, who rescues her. and then they go to crash the wedding. Prunella is at the door, so instead, Eloise and Nanny go up into an air duct. I believe that an air duct is small enough for a 6-year-old. I don't know if an air duct is small enough for an adult woman. But it turns out Eloise and Nanny didn't even need to show up because Rachel says no. And then Bill runs into the wedding and the two of them kiss. That night, Mr. Peabody summons Eloise and he's like, "Is this all your fault?" And Eloise is like, "Yes." And then he summons Mrs. Thornton and he has Bill playing a Bavarian prince. And then Bill, as the prince, tells Mrs. Thornton that there was some trouble with the Bavarian government, but they were able to get the money and she can stay at the plaza. And Mr. Peabody thanks Eloise and Brooks is arrested. Mrs. Thornton being allowed to stay at the plaza free of charge sounds crazy. That must cost so much money. There's no way that they would be okay with that. My only thought is that maybe because she's really old, they're like, well, this is only a temporary problem. And at the very end, Eloise's mother comes in wearing the largest coat I've ever seen in my life. The end. I appreciate all of Eloise's scheming. It felt like there were less subplots than in the first movie, which isn't necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, just something I noticed. I loved how Christmassy this movie was, partially because of when I watched it, working on this video in December. It felt very fun and seasonally appropriate. And also because after watching the Samantha movie, the American Girl Samantha movie, which is called an American Girl holiday, but not Christmassy at all, it was fun to watch a movie that really committed to the Christmas. The score is again fantastic. I didn't love the actual, musical stuff. It was especially weird because that didn't happen at all in the first movie, so I was not expecting this amount of singing. But whatever. Then there was a cartoon in 2006. It was made by Stars, which is random. It is one season of 13 episodes. Each episode is 24 minutes, except that all of the episodes are two-parters. So episode 1 is actually half of the story. It's episode 1 and 2 together that are the full story. Am I explaining this weird? I don't know. So they released all of them on DVD as 45-minute specials. I did not like this show. I thought it was not good. I watched the first episode and I did not watch more of it. I don't like the art style. It looks very, comedy cartoon for adults, which I think the director of the cartoon, that's what he does. So I guess that makes sense, but I think it looks ugly. The voice actor for Eloise doesn't sound like Eloise to me. She sounds like she's doing just a generic kid's role.
I know this is going to be the best birthday ever.
The tone in general is very, clean and nice and kind of boring. I think the live action was a nice middle ground of tone, not as dark as the books. Maybe dark's the wrong word, but Eloise is a nicer character in the movies, but she's still sort of chaotic and mischievous, scheming and spying. Whereas this cartoon, she's just boring. Also in 2006, we get a new book called Eloise in Hollywood. Originally, it was going to be just Hilary Knight working on it, but the publisher didn't like his text and they kept rewriting it. And then at a certain point, he was kicked from the project entirely. So the only illustration that's by Hilary Knight is the cover, which that's a bummer. I didn't get the book for this video because I consider it non-canonical. We don't even need to bother with that one. There's been a few canceled Eloise projects. There was going to be an animated movie announced in 2009 called Eloise in Africa. An animatic from it resurfaced online. I was not able to find it because it has since been taken down and the Wayback Machine did not work. So that was a bummer. Then there was going to be a live action Eloise called Eloise in Paris. It was going to star Uma Thurman as Nanny, which feels like a weird choice. This would have been 2009, so I don't know if she was old enough, and she's also not English. The movie didn't end up happening, and so Uma Thurman sued the production company because she was waiting around to do this movie and lost out on other work. In 2014, there was a book called The 365 Days of Eloise, where Eloise celebrates holidays throughout the year. This was both written and illustrated by Hilary Knight. And nowadays, Eloise is a fixture in the plaza. There's a whole Eloise section on the plaza's website. There is a shop in the lobby with various Eloise merchandise. You can also shop online, of course. You can go to an Eloise-themed tea at the Palm Court. And there's also an Eloise-themed suite. It's like $2,000 to $3,000 a night. It is all pink. You get Eloise merchandise when you stay there. A lot of what I found online is influencer parents bringing their kids there. So like filming their little girl going in the Eloise suite, which I find kind of gross and exploitative to use your child for content. That's a different conversation for a different day. I did briefly think, like, do I need to go to the plaza for this video and stay at the Eloise suite? And I was like, Sarah, no. I'm not making that level of YouTube money yet. I felt justified in buying the costume, but not that. So that is the history of Eloise. It was a lot more drama than I was expecting. I had no idea. I thought it was just picture books and a movie with Julie Andrews. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, you can subscribe. I am Sarah Seraph on all social media, even if I don't post that much. And as always, all of the sources that I used are linked in a Google Doc in the description. And I don't know how to end a YouTube video. So, bye!